well, a couple. Well, we all know about the Ramage Museum, so I went to, if there are any new faces here, I would tell them all about the Battery Hooper Ramage Museum. Great place to go and visit. And the second thing is, Northern Kentucky History Day is coming up on the 23rd, I guess. And there's several programs you can attend. If you register early, it's $8, and if you register at the door, it's $10. So it's not that big a deal. It's not really expensive, but it's really good. They used to have it at Northern, then they moved it to Boone County to the library out there, and this year it's at Erlanger at the library. And the other thing is, of course, I'll put a plug in for the Campbell County Historical Society, another good group. And I might as well lastly put one in for my old group, the Cincinnati Roundtable. I haven't been in that group for a couple of years. I've been away from them, but that's also a very good group. So a lot of nice things. And without further ado, I will introduce. Yes.
I don't know if anybody, how many of you know this, but in Georgetown, Ohio, this weekend, Ed Barris is going to be there.
Oh.
I checked the site today, and he's still scheduled to be there. So if anybody was interested in going up there for that, I'm not sure how many more opportunities this thing will yield.
Yeah.
He's now 95 years old.
I was gonna say, he's great. Yeah, he's an amazing guy.
Oh, he is. He's got an eidetic memory when it comes to the Civil War.
I love when you hear his voice. Hello, Ohio. I'm here in Kentucky too. Boy, his voice, the way he does it.
Oh, yes.
He's just really something. He's amazing. But anyway, tonight we have Andrew and Andrew's sister here. She's a lot better looking than you are, Andrew. She
no argument there. She inherited the looks in the family.
But anyway,
I might introduce myself and her in the
yes, that
long
would be
show.
good.
Are you sure he wasn't the adopted one?
Okay. Without further ado, I'll sit down. Again, I
Thank you.
appreciate you coming out and giving this talk.
Okay. Andrew Lutes, a longtime member of the Roundtable with a history degree from Northern. My sister, Marianna Lutes Briner, has an arts degree from Northern, and she lives in, as I've said, in the village of Glendale, Ohio, which was one of the places raided by John Hunt Morgan during his 1863 ride around Cincinnati. It's still prominently marked as part of the John Hunt Morgan trail in that area. I've been in that, markers, plaques, and get that up. You can't go through Glendale without knowing John Hunt Morgan came through here. John Hunt Morgan certainly put Glendale on the map, and the village is eternally grateful to him for that. And I will speak briefly on Army rations during the war, and Marianna will speak on, because this is March and Patrick's Day takes place during March, so I'm kind of making a combination between Army rations in the Irish and food during the Civil War. So we'll speak on, Marianna will speak on Irish American conditions in Cincinnati in the mid-1800s, and in particular about a dish that is usually thought of as being German, but Marianna has found circumstantial evidence that shows that it may have started with the poor Irish instead. And as to Civil War rations of food, well, it's Civil War soldiers were not known for eating well. Since food preservation was still not very advanced in the Civil War times, the food carried had to be in a condition to survive a long march and still be eatable. And in Civil War times, this usually meant hard bread and salt pork. The hard bread, usually in the hard blocks of flour called hardtack, which, as they say, are harder than dog biscuits. They had to be broken up with hard force and then soaked or fried until they were swallowable. Salt pork, salt being the preservative available, the salt had to be boiled out to get the salt out to be and then pounded or in order to be palatable, and then boiled or fried to be edible. And since bread and meat both had to be fried to be edible, it often made sense to cook them together. And there were many inventive kinds of dishes that combined the carbohydrates and meats. The fried varieties are given a lot of names, like skilly-galley, the hardtack fried in grease. And the rebels chiefly used cornmeal. The hardtack, easy to make, but difficult to eat, and probably to digest as well. And Cincinnati in 1863, sort of the community Marianna will be speaking of, as the ones the Irish, certainly had a rough time of living in now. But I'd like for Marianna to come up and give her presentation now. Yeah, well, as I said, to speak briefly, chiefly, I wanted the people to hear what you had to say about the conditions of the Irish in the mid-1800s, and in detail.
Okay. When my Aunt Andrea moved to Sarasota, Florida in the 1970s, she found herself with some homesickness and a tight budget. To satisfy her craving for a taste of home, she went to her local Piggly Wiggly. She found pork, easily enough, but standing in the cereal aisle, she had to ask for help from the stock boy. "Excuse me, where are the pinnotes?" "Sorry, the what?" "Pinnotes, you know, the kind that aren't flattened out." "I don't think we have those, ma'am. What do you want them for anyway?" "I want to make Goetta." Clearly, he hadn't heard of that either, and poor Aunt Andrea went home bereft. They called to her sister, and a package of the familiar Dorsets was in the mail parcel post. It's no secret Cincinnatians love their Goetta. It isn't found anywhere else in the country. When Bob Evans first opened their chain of restaurants here, they initially featured Goetta on the menu, but it had to be removed because everyone ordered that, and not their signature sausage. Maplewood Restaurant downtown prides itself on using fresh and local food, and the waitress said she can always tell when someone is from out of town. "What's Goetta?" "Is that some kind of cheese?" If you aren't from around here, Goetta is a mixture of pork and often beef mixed with pinnotes and spices pressed into cylindrical or loaf shape, sliced and fried. I have some recipes here. Yeah, here's Goetta. It's typically served for breakfast and eaten plain or with ketchup, although I've also heard grape jelly and maple syrup. Many butchers and small meat markets in the greater Cincinnati area sell their own recipe, including Eckerlin's in Findlay Market, Averill Bled downtown, Wassler Meats in Bridgetown, Gerse in Groesbeck, Bridgetown Finer Meats in Bridgetown, Hammond's in Fairfield, Queen City Sausage in Camp Washington, Langen Meats in Harrison, Stalin's in Coleraine, Humbert's in Mount Healthy, and the Wyoming Meat Market in Wyoming are all located downtown or west of I-75. Here's a map to illustrate this point. You'll notice the east side seems to be vegetarian. Not a meat market over there at all. Those are all. Let's see, and Finke's and Fort Wright, Kramer's and Crescent Springs, Stam's and Erlanger, and Gleer's and Covington are all located in northern Kentucky. Queen City, Gleer's and Wassler are all wholesalers and can be found in supermarkets. In fact, I don't mention this later, but Gleer's was the first ones marketed in a supermarket in 1946, and not until 1946 did they appear in a supermarket. Wow. Interesting. Of the few East Side markets interviewed, Luigi's, Hyde Park Meats, and Holzman Meats carry Goetta, but were supplied by Gleer's or Wasslers. So to cook it, heat the skillet to medium, slice the Goetta no more than a ½ inch thick. Let it sit in the skillet until it's nice and crusty on the bottom before flipping it, or it falls apart and you have Goetta scramble. Be aware that it tends to pop sizzling little pin-up shrapnel onto your arms as it cooks, so you may want to wear long sleeves as a precaution. Why is Goetta peculiar to Cincinnati and nowhere else? It is readily accepted that it is of German origin because we had so many German immigrants in the 19th century. Everyone knows German food is very good. Plus, it has a name that looks like a German word and with extra vowels and odd pronunciation. You will find Goetta served up at Oktoberfest next to the Metz brats and sauerkraut balls. So it must be German. If it pleases the court, I'd like to re-examine the origins of this interesting food. So often, a misconception becomes so ingrained in the public opinion that it's taken as fact without a second thought. For instance, the French horn isn't French. It's German, developed into the single, double, and triple horns over many years by successive inventors from the simple English hunting horn. But the misnomer has stuck. All the years I was growing up, I thought the iconic stone walls that bordered the lovely horse farms in central Kentucky were built by slaves. In fact, they were built by the Irish, English, Scots immigrants who found that, just like in Britain, Kentucky soil has 3 rocks to every dirt, and dealt with them in the same way as at home, stacking them up into hedgerows. I have a picture of that. Yeah, here you can compare the pictures of English and Kentucky fences. They're identical. Eventually, the farmers grew prosperous enough to own a slave or two and taught them the art of stonemasonry. Travelers passing on the road might have seen African American men maintaining the walls and made the broader assumption that slaves built them in the first place. Here's a brief history of immigration in Cincinnati. The first white settlers to this region were mostly of Protestant, English, and Scottish ancestry. In 1830, only 5% of the population was German. By 1850, that percentage had swelled to 50% or more. While Cincinnatians embrace their German heritage today, historically the opposite was true. Immigrants left Germany fleeing religious persecution and seeking economic opportunities. In America, they were met with religious persecution and job discrimination. Despite opposition, they set up their own newspapers, schools, breweries, societies, clubs, theaters, and Catholic churches in the area north of the Erie Canal, known as Over the Rhine. The long-standing citizens who had been established for generations felt threatened by the overwhelming numbers of immigrants. This held true for many cities across the U.S. The Know Nothing Party formed in opposition to immigration. These Native Americans disapproved of Catholics and that they chose to drink and socialize on the Sabbath. It is important to remember, however, that Germans were not the only ethnic population pouring into the country at that time. At the same time, the potato famine of 1840 brought waves of Irish immigrants as well. While one could give credit to the Germans for being educated and skilled and self-sufficient, the Irish were not only Catholic, but starving, destitute, and unskilled for anything but the hardest labor. They worked building the railroad, digging the canal, or in the slaughterhouses. They settled in slums along the river or in the West End. Notices appeared in establishments, help wanted, Irish need not apply. By 1851, there were more than 13,000 Irish living in Cincinnati area and represented 12% of the population. Cincinnati was once the largest pork processing city in America. In 1840, there were 48 slaughterhouses employing 12,000 people. By 1860, that number had doubled. Pigs were driven through the streets to the slaughterhouses by the thousands. Refuse from the slaughterhouse was dumped into the Ohio River or the Erie Canal. The city smelled nauseating. There was no refrigeration, so the city reeked of excrement and rotting meat. Only the poorest and most destitute would work in the slaughterhouses for wages barely above subsistence, and the influx of immigrants provided a steady workforce. Anyone sick or injured on the job was fired and quickly replaced. The hours were long and the work physically demanding. The only perk was that at the end of the day, workers were allowed to sweep up and take home whatever scraps had fallen to the slaughterhouse floor. Yeah. Yeah, it's going home with me.
That's pretty gross.
Eventually, the bulk of the meat slaughtering industry moved to Chicago. While the German immigrants had established a community in Over the Rhine, they didn't stay there. When the neighborhood had become run down and crowded, so the Irish and Germans of Cincinnati fanned out to the west side and northern Kentucky. Land there was inexpensive, and they could have small farms, dairies, and neighborhoods. Even today, there's a notable difference between the east and west sides of Cincinnati. The West Side has many Catholic churches and schools, festivals, fish fries, there's always a split the pot. There's a clannishness that manifests as the seemingly innocent question of where did you go to school? They don't mean college, they mean high school, so as to sort out where you're from and who your people are. Today, Cheviot boasts the largest number of Irish descendants in the Cincinnati area. As stated before, the West Side and Northern Kentucky have the most of the small established meat markets, mostly bearing German names. A search for Goetta on the internet brought me to many websites which made several commonly held assertions I would like to cross-examine. 1, Goetta is of German origin. 2, it is similar to Scrapple. 3, it is derived from a German breakfast sausage. 4, the name Goetta is derived from the German word Grütz or Grata, which roughly translates to grits. My first suspicion that Goetta might not be German was when we were visiting London, and in a small restaurant in Croydon, I ordered the full English fry-up for breakfast. It was a huge amount of food, including eggs, toast, beans, fried red tomato, sausage, loin bacon, mushrooms, and something that appeared to be a scab. It turned out to be the white pudding, and it tasted, to my great surprise, just like Goetta. I have asked friends from Germany if they have anything like Goetta at home. I received a blank look and a slow, thoughtful 9. Because Germans typically do not eat a hot breakfast, but have their big meal at midday and leftovers or a sandwich in the evening. The English breakfast is a tuck-in because during the days of the Industrial Revolution, the working class had to eat as much as they could before working a 12-hour day in the factories, with only a short break for high tea taken standing up at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Let me pass around another recipe here for, here's the recipe for white pudding. So Goetta does resemble Scrapple. Scrapple, excuse me. Scrapple is particular to the Philadelphia region and uses cornmeal as its extender instead of oats. Both are peasant foods designed to disguise unpalatable bits of meat with a grain and a few seasonings to make it feed more empty bellies. In fact, both Goetta and Scrapple resemble many foods. Almost every culture across the globe has a food of the same ilk. Peasant food designed to disguise cheap cuts of meat with enough spices to cover the possibility the meat was a bit high and mixed with the grain. Some of them are as follows: Germany, Gritswurst; Holland, Balkenbridge; Iceland, Slater; Italy, Cuticino; Slovakia, Jatterniki; Scotland, haggis, skirly, and Lorne sausage; France, Le Boudin Blanc; Poland, Siska; Western North Carolina, liver mush; Philadelphia, Scrapple; Pennsylvania Dutch, Panhas. One could also include meatloaf and hot dogs to the list. I also noticed the Wikipedia page defining Scrapple made no comparison with Goetta. In truth, Scrapple bears a much stronger resemblance to liver mush served in Western North Carolina, as both use cornmeal as an extender instead of oats. Goetta most closely resembles the white pudding of England, Scotland, and Ireland. So you can compare those. Jamie Oliver recorded a session with school children showing them how chicken nuggets are made, hoping to interest them in making healthier choices. He spared no detail in making it look as appalling as possible. The meaty parts, breast, thigh, and leg meat, are removed. The rest of the carcass is stuffed into a blender along with some extra fat and salt to make a thick pink paste that was divided, breaded, and fried. The children were suitably disgusted by the whole process. At the end, Jamie asked, "So, who wants a chicken nugget?" To his surprise and dismay, every child raised his or her hand. Heck yeah, we love chicken nuggets. It takes some cleverness to make what would otherwise be wasted into something desirable. Before the German immigrants came to Cincinnati, spare ribs were thrown into the Ohio River as an edible waste. We all know hot dogs contain parts of the pig we'd rather not think about, but we eat hot dogs anyway. There is nothing unusual in the technique of making Goetta, but what makes it distinctive from any other peasant food. All the peasant foods listed above are consistent with using random meat and offal parts, but vary with the type of grain filler added to the mix. Note that my Aunt Andrea, standing in a southern grocery store, never once considered substituting readily available cornmeal for the pinoats. The notion of, that's okay, I'll just make Scrapple instead, never crossed her mind. It's pinoats or it's not Goetta. All the previously mentioned meat markets are located in the West Side, downtown, or northern Kentucky, where the majority of the population is descended from German and Irish immigrants. Its startling resemblance to British white pudding is undeniable, however. It more likely came with the vast numbers of Irish immigrants who made it from the scraps that came off the slaughterhouse floor, and it wouldn't be unlikely that a few German immigrants took the recipe and, like they did with the French horn, made it better. Germans engineered the simple hunting horn into the beautiful instrument we know today. Keep in mind that a German can make lasagna, but it doesn't make lasagna a German dish. Certainly the Germans are better known for delicious sausages and beer, even though the British have them too. In the United States, it's easy to find a restaurant from almost every ethnicity: Italian, Chinese, Indian, Cuban, etc., but very seldom English or Irish. If you do find one, the menu has been Americanized. Even the Cock and Bull serves the Queen's nachos. You know, the Queen likes a little Mexican now and then. The British don't seem to be known for excellent cuisine, and even they prefer curries or their own iconic fish and chips. Although I found all the food in England to be delicious, British food doesn't seem to go out of its way to sound appetizing. It often sounds like something you'd serve as a practical joke. Bangers and mash, treacle tart, digestive biscuits, spotted dick, bubble and squeak, pasties, buddy, kippers, jellied eel, cock-a-leekie soup, toad in the hole, eaten mess, hobnobs, singing hinnies, meat faggots, which are a meatball, I promise, and the list goes on. No wonder Goetta would be easier to market under a German flag. In summation, Cincinnati was not the only city in the United States to experience waves of German immigrants. Columbus, Ohio, Louisville, Kentucky, St. Louis, Missouri, and others have the same story of immigration, but none of these other cities have anything like Goetta. The Germans may have settled in over the Rhine, but they didn't stay there. When the meatpacking industry moved to Chicago, the second and third generation immigrants skilled in butchering meat moved to the west side in northern Kentucky to buy affordable farmland and set up their own small meat markets. When Irish, Scotch, English descendants asked for cheap cuts of meat to make pudding, the butchers saw a market and produced a product better than what they might make at home, with better cuts of meat and seasonings. Like most Americans, we like convenience and would happily pay a little more for a good product rather than to go to the trouble of making it at home. Cincinnati happened to have a perfect storm of German and Irish immigration and slaughterhouses for Goetta to emerge as an indigenous food. So, if Goetta is really Irish white pudding with a German accent, then what's with the funny name? We all know the English language never uses inexplicable spellings and useless vowels. And certainly we couldn't keep calling it a pudding in the States, where pudding has an entirely different definition. So while Goetta does bear a scant resemblance to the German words Goetta and Grütz, meaning grits, going through a list of British slang, I did find the word gettables, defined as things you can get for free, such as lollipops at the bank, free samples at Costco, or even what you can sweep off the slaughterhouse floor. You can see how that can evolve. So in conclusion, I can present anecdotal evidence of Goetta's origins and weigh suppositions and still offer no absolute proof as to its popularity in this area.
My chief reason for having this was in front of a Civil War Roundtable group to try to pull together army rations and the frying of carbohydrates with meat and grease, along with this being a March Irish month, Patrick's Day, and to hear what you would say about the Irish conditions in Cincinnati around about the time of the Civil War, and then talk about the probable Irish origins of Goetta. And this appears to be an original thesis on your part, Marianna, because prior to this, I and everyone else thought Goetta was German, but you have, I think, uncovered a lot of circumstantial evidence that shows, at least to my mind, pretty conclusively, that it is of Irish origin. However, what I would like to do now is kind of open it to discussion, and each person in here, I'd like to go around each person. What is your experience with Goetta. What do you think about Goetta? What about you, David?
Well, I found that most of the factories at that time had German immigrants and Irish at the same time. So if the Irish were sweeping up the stuff off the floor, the German immigrants were certainly doing it at the same time. So that might be a way it did it without them just copying it. It might be their immigrants just, upsized like you said, so.
Yeah, any German would take meat scraps and make it into sausage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there was both Irish and German immigrants, both things, and then there was also a small amount of, they didn't allow a lot of them, but there was a small amount of blacks at the time that was allowed, to work in the factories, but they weren't actually working in with the meat, they were actually using, like, moving the carts and the barrels and everything else. They were given even more or less jobs than the rest of them, so.
Well, a lot of the Germans were already skilled in the art of butchering, so they were up on the butchering line, whereas the others, the packers, were down further down.
And I'm sure that if the Germans were running some of the factories, I'm sure they're gonna give their immigrants better choice than the
Yeah,
Irish. So
never
that's,
cuts.
my opinion, that's probably one reason it's more German than Irish in Cincinnati.
What about you, Ken? What was your experience with Goetta?
I had to tell a little funny story here about, I lived in Chicago for several years.
Yeah.
Business home, but I lived up there, worked up there, and I made friends with this one bookstore owner up there whose last name was Fiedler, and his family was German origin. So he and his wife, after I retired, they came down here on vacation. They were going to South Carolina or somewhere, so they decided to stop by and visit me. So we were going to go out for breakfast. So I took them to the old Perkins in Highland Heights where Frisch's is there. And I ordered Goetta. And of course this guy from Chicago, he kind of teased, he said, "Goetta? What in the world is that? Is that a hillbilly dish or something?" I said, "Oh no." I said, "Your family originated in Germany." I said, "I think it's a German dish. It's really good. Sounds disgusting to me." So I ordered it, and I ate some, and I said, "Here, Bill, try some of this. Let's try it." "Oh," I said, "No, try it." And he took a bite of it, and he went, "Not too bad." And a little later he said, "Let me have some more of that." And finally he said, "How much more?" And when he went back to Chicago, he called me up a little later and said, "You think you could ship some of this stuff back to me in Chicago?" Yeah, so I mean, and I grew up with it because my dad was a butcher, a meat cutter, so I was, I always heard that in Pennsylvania area they had what they called scrapple, but I really wasn't that familiar with what scrapple really was, in comparison to Goetta, but now he made it clear about the, the difference between the two. But I think that was, that's pretty much my experience with the Goetta.
But what about you, Leo? Did you?
Yeah, I
you did
grew up
grow-
with Goetta too. My grandmother, she used to make it, and her parents, they came from Germany. So I've had it ever since I was little. And then after that, my mom, she made it. I guess she got the recipe from her mom. But I had some relatives visiting from Germany. They're actual Germans that came to visit me. And I offered them Goetta, and they didn't want no part of it. They didn't want nothing to do with it. So.
What about you, John? What was?
Well, I come from a family of policemen and firemen, and they survive on Goetta. They love the stuff, breakfast, and I've got to be honest with you, I could care less about Goetta. But when you started talking about the Germans and the Irish, I grew up in a little town called Bellevue. Within a block and a half were two Catholic churches. One was German and one was Irish, and they would have nothing to do with each other. Absolutely nothing. In fact, when they finally had to combine the churches a few years back, the ones from the church that was being closed out went to another parish completely, just to avoid being with these people. Which shows you that there's no love lost, even much later, between the two. But when you and I were talking on Saturday, I think you brought up the most salient point of all. I don't think it's German or Irish. I think it's American. It's an American dish because I don't care if you came from there, if they don't have it there, it's here. And so here is where this dish originated. It's an American dish. It may have a name, nobody can be sure about its ancestry, and whoever named it may have used something from they're passed, but if the only place you get it is here, and nobody else from their home countries knows anything about it, it's gotta be here.
I have to tell you, I did have some visitors from England
Yeah,
in my kitchen, and it was some counselors that were international counselors from Camp Ernest, and they came home with my kids for the weekend.
yeah,
So I thought, okay, good, we're gonna give them a good full breakfast that isn't like camp food. And we put out bacon and sausage, and I put out the Goetta, and I said, you may not like it, it's kind of a regional thing. Well, they didn't really like the bacon or the sausage, because their bacon and sausage is completely different in
Yes.
England. But they loved the Goetta, loved it, couldn't get enough. Can I have some more, please?
Well,
Loved it. Because it probably tasted just like boy pudding, that's what I had on my plate, it's just like, this is Goetta, I know it is. And maybe they were making it, even the original people who moved here, you know, before the immigration wave.
I wouldn't even call it
They might
American,
make
I'd
an
call it
event.
Cincinnati dish.
well, yeah, that's, you can do it that way too.
Yeah.
Call it a
All
Cincinnati.
America has it.
Yeah,
Because if you're running around and you can't find it anywhere else, it's here.
yeah.
But Dr. and Mrs. Ramage, I believe you come from Western Kentucky, so coming into this area, when did you first learn about Goetta?
When we got here, I had never heard of it. And I'd never eaten it, I lived in So there we go, I don't know what it is. We had something called souse. Have you ever heard that word?
yeah.
Yeah. So I don't think it had the oats in it, I don't believe. And I did not like it, but that was served sometimes in Western Kentucky. It was mainly pork, I think, but it was a mixture like this. But I have no experience with that.
Yeah, we slaughtered hogs, her family did too, on the farm, and we made sausage, and you could either smoke it or not smoke it. Either way, you keep it refrigerated and salt it down. And it was delicious. And my grandmother made souse. I think it was cheap cuts of pork,
I think so.
very
yeah.
cheap, that you normally wouldn't eat. Parts of what, you know?
Similar thing, yeah.
And it was round and packed like sausage and sliced like Goetta, and fried like Goetta. So that was the closest that I'd ever heard of that was like Goetta, but we never heard of it till we came here. Never heard of Goetta.
I got a question about something. I think, Marianna, you might have mentioned something about spare ribs or something, that they didn't use them, they just kind of threw. And it was funny, because I guess coming from a family where my dad was a meat cutter and everything, we kind of grew up with spare ribs and sauerkraut.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I moved to Chicago that I ever heard of barbecued spare ribs. I thought, what is this, barbecued spare ribs? I don't, you know, but I think that's kind of interesting how that part of the pork, of course up there in Chicago they also have beef ribs too, but you know, it was just kind of interesting thinking about the spare ribs, that part, where that came from. There's a lot of things like, I know up there, when you mentioned chili spaghetti, they looked at you like you were nuts. They didn't know what you were talking about. In the Cincinnati days, chili spaghetti or
Or do you put cheese on that?
Yeah.
A lot of, put
Yeah.
cheese on spaghetti?
Yeah. Or Coney Island,
Coney
you
Islands,
know, that
yeah.
came, I think, from New York originally, from Coney Island, but you know, certain
Are you
foods.
sure? We had a Coney Island.
Yeah, we did, I know, but, I mean, it might have been this one might have been before that one, I don't know. I know they had those up there, but, it's funny that you could
When
read.
we would slaughter a hog, the delicacy, the luxury that night was pork tenderloin.
Oh,
And
yeah.
that's the pork chops, but it's cut in a strip, and you slice it thin,
Yeah.
and, oh, it was delicious, fresh out of, fresh from the hog being killed that day, it was out of sight.
You know where the term high in the hog comes from, right?
Round the hog.
All the good cuts are high in the hog, right?
And the rich people got to eat those, and so they were always eating high on the hog, and everybody else ate the lesser parts.
Yes, the feet, the jowls, the bellies, yeah,
The bacon,
yeah.
Pig's feet, pig's ears, yeah. That's when you really get
Right.
low.
I heard there were kind of jokes like the master, just out of curiosity, trying the food that the enslaved people were eating and finding to his surprise it tasted better than what they were serving him in the big house.
Smother things in grease and you can eat anything.
Bacon makes everything better.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, they also had something called hard bread, which I'd never heard of before, that they hardened the outside of the bread, and they said it kept the center moist and soft longer, and it was easier to carry it longer periods by making the outer shell
Shut the air
hard.
out.
Huh.
Yeah.
I noticed, I have a book about Cincinnati tea rooms, and they put menus on there from all the different tea rooms that used to be in downtown. And tongue was on the menu. And I just thought, oh my gosh, boy, did that go out of fashion. Tongue was like a delicate sandwich, and it was just like, oh.
Unless you're eating chili.
Yeah.
And when they make chili down south, they use beef tongue along with lots of other things like cow brain.
Yeah.
It's all, well, once you put it in that pot, it's all there together.
Okay, Worthmore's mock turtle soup. I love this stuff, don't read the ingredient label.
No
I
turtle.
love that soup, and it's just like a local thing, it's that mock turtle, but it's got beef hearts in it.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I just don't want to go there.
I know a friend of mine said, when I was talking about it, we went in this restaurant, and the waitress said, our special tonight is tongue or whatever, and he said, no, thank you, I refuse to taste something that can taste me.
Well, as I remember growing up with you, Marianna, our mother served us obviously bacon. I don't remember a lot of
She served us
Goetta
bacon, yeah.
being served, a
No,
lot of
I didn't get
Goetta.
it from the Burnhams.
So, yes, so Goetta was something I gradually learned about, and then as the years go by, hearing about the Goetta Fest and hearing more about it, and then finally seeing it in restaurants and trying it, and the assumption that when it had that umlaut in it, Goetta, well, if whoever names it owns it.
Yeah, Mom's family made it all the time. Grandma Bain made it
Yeah.
a lot. She was a Lancaster, Grandpa was a Bain. So that's your English Scot, you know, putting that together. But on Dad's farm, you know, they slaughtered pigs, but they never made Goetta. Aunt Barbara said she never had it until she was married in 1946, and Glears put it on the market, I guess. So as far south as Florence, it just ceased to exist.
Yeah.
The Scots had something called kidney pie. Do you remember?
Steak and kidney pie.
Yeah,
Or they have
yeah.
haggis, which is just like it
That was,
too.
yeah.
Haggis and scurly.
Yeah.
How prominent is onion in Goetta?
Okay, so different, we sampled Goetta from different meat markets. My husband works, you know, he'll go over to the west side in Bridgetown, so we got Wassler's, we tasted that. That is like, they regrind it, so it's very fine grain, the oats are. Bridgetown meats was very coarse, it had a hard time holding it together, and it was a lot of onion, lots of onion. So was Wyoming Meat Market, so there's a lot of differences between Goettas,
Yeah.
between meat markets. And almost like you can go up and ask somebody, where'd you go to high school? You can ask them, what's your meat market? And they'll tell you. Because it's that regional, it's just like these little pockets of,
That's interesting.
yeah.
Well, until the Krogers and those took over, you could, even here in northern Kentucky, you would find that everybody went to these individual standalone meat markets.
Oh, well, you
Yeah.
can buy it at Kroger's, but everybody knows it's better at the meat market.
Well, yeah, and I guess what I'm saying is that the way they butchered what they had, the grade of what they had, how fresh it was, all of that figured into these people while they decided what they were gonna buy. The little town where I live, they went absolutely depressed when the local meat market closed because the guy died,
Yeah.
and there was nobody to replace him.
Yeah.
And they just thought that was the most terrible. Saturday was not
We're
Saturday
already
unless they could go
starved.
down there and buy it.
Where are we supposed to get meat now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, you don't mean we have to go to Kroger's, do you?
Yeah.
We enjoyed watching the women shopping with their baskets in England, in little towns like York and all over. And they come out in the morning and they stand at the meat market and look in the window and just look and study it, decide what they're gonna buy, you know, and then they go in and buy some meat for the evening. So it's a big deal to buy meat in England.
Yeah.
This also, I think, brings up sort of the philosophy, history point of, in history, obviously, if we found, say, a reminiscence from a German butcher saying the day we first made Goetta, that kind of thing, or the origin of Goetta, if such a thing could be found, well, that would be ideal from the historiographical point of view to have where did Goetta come from? Well, a recollection that actually wrote it down and perhaps published in a newspaper or in a book of
Well, even the
recollections.
thing on Goetta doesn't say, it says probably of German origin. It doesn't say it's German.
Absolutely,
It
yeah.
says probably of German.
But even at the end, it says, you know, well, Germans don't really eat this for breakfast either.
Yeah.
But,
So even they weren't sure, so.
yeah, they're, I thought I lost it.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, it's okay.
Well, it was sort of the point in sort of the philosophy, historiography, the writing of history. If you don't have a definite written source, you must rely on circumstantial evidence like this and come to the best conclusion that you can. Of course, mentioning, as you have had the appropriate caveats, that I don't have the direct written source for this, but there is sufficient circumstantial evidence to make it a very probable case, as you would say.
Yeah, well, it comes down to you need to eat what you have to in order to survive. You know, one cookbook I had said the earliest settlers came here and they wanted to cook like the English out of admiration, but they ended up cooking like the Indians for the sake of survival. So, I mean, like even the English are like, what's with all the maple flavoring in American food? This is like, because that's what we had. We grew accustomed to having maple flavor because that's what we eat in America. That's what the Indians were eating, so we learned to eat it too. So, you know, you adapt where you're going to, but you keep some things, but you have to adapt to where you are.
You know how steak sauce got its name, don't you?
How?
You know, when the Pilgrims started out and they had a feast at Thanksgiving, the wives of the Pilgrims made this real nice sauce to put on the meat. So one of the Indians, he poured that sauce on the meat and took a bite of it and he went, Worcestershire sauce. And so after that,
What's this here sauce?
This is the bottle of A1. It has since since 1863, and somebody said, so in the middle of the Civil War, we just decided we need a good tasty steak sauce. Let's develop that right now.
Well, when the meat is as close to rancid as they probably can, you will find anything to flavor it so that it'll go down.
True.
Cover it up.
You can eat something that it won't pass your taste buds, but it won't kill you.
True. Well, it is a sort of thing in Civil War cooking, the frying of something, because food preservation wasn't quite as advanced during Civil War times. Frequently, especially from crooked contractors, the meat did come to the soldiers in a spoiled condition. But if you're starving and you're hungry, well, we've got to eat something, so you can imagine them cutting it thin and frying it very deep, and hopefully that will cover it. And germ theory still only being a theory at that time of the Civil War. Perhaps the heavy frying in grease might have killed whatever pathogen.
You remember when the Confederates took the Union to Snow Pond, and when they left, they killed 2 mules and dumped them in the pond.
Yeah.
Well, when the Union came back, that was the only drinking water around. So the guy, there was I was up from a guy, he says, we still had to drink the water, we boiled it, but it was the worst mule soup we ever tasted.
Well, if you boil it, you've killed the germs. It may taste bad, but the germs that'll kill you.
Yeah, but wonder how he knew what mule soup tasted like, so that was the first time.
Well, if you read a lot of their accounts, eating mule, horse, and anything else that had meat on it was sometimes a necessity that they were willing. I mean, if you eat a rat, you eat a mule.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah, they got some trenches.
well, and not only that, but you read the stories about Vicksburg during the siege. They were down to eating dead horses and rats before they finally surrendered. So you can get pretty desperate, and if you read World War II, Petersburg and Stalingrad and those places, when they were in siege for 18 months, those people ate whatever you could get to eat. In fact, I'd be afraid to ask some of the things they did eat.
Well,
A lot of people weren't found.
one of the urban legends of the Civil War, I'm not sure this be concerned, but realizing as the months were going on, the rebels were hungry, the Yankees deliberately frying up lots of bacon, and when the wind was blowing in the direction of the rebel lines, to make sure the lots of bacon was frying, so the odor of the cooking bacon would go. And when rebel prisoners would crawl out of the lines at Petersburg to surrender, the first thing they would ask, could I have something to eat? So it obviously, the blockade did, if, as Napoleon says, an army marches on its stomach, if there's nothing in the stomach, it can't march there at all.
Well, and you remember when General John Pope was beaten at Second Manassas, they captured most of his supply dump.
Yes.
And what I was amazed to read was that even though it was in its infancy, there were tin cans which had oysters in them,
Yes.
which the Confederates then proceeded to consume. And I often wondered if maybe you killed off more people with that than you did with bullets.
Well, true. There is the point, just how sterile were the foods without a Food and Drug Administration until the turn of the century. Anything you can up and ship out. Well, if you're desperate for food, well, that's what you take down. Although a question, if I might ask you, Dr. Ramage, about historical editorship. Do historical editors turn down papers based on circumstantial evidence? Do historical editors demand, I guess, paper sources that can be?
Usually.
Okay, so if it's based on circumstantial evidence, it has a harder time getting published then. Okay, well.
Probably unless you state that it is.
Okay, well, I think it's an interesting thesis. Well, I find it interesting. It's an interesting thesis. It's one of these things I would like for you to at least submit it for publication. And if you get rejection slips back, well, I think it's an interesting idea that deserves to be gotten out there. And the fact that this is on tape, on camera, perhaps this will be broadcast. In fact, could we ask you, our camera person, what your Goetta experience was? Could you tell us? Yes.
I'm like Mrs. Ramage, I moved here, never heard of Goetta, never eaten it.
So that confirms that this is.
I have noticed that when people just move in here, they don't even bother trying it. Yeah, a lot of people, when I originally read this paper to my club members, a lot of them were not from Cincinnati. And they said, well, I finally tried it after I heard your paper. It was good. I was like, okay.
Well, Andrew's a convert. We went to Frisch's and he had for breakfast, and all he ate was Goetta. And he said he was doing research.
Likely story.
But it is one of these things. Well, obviously, you look at it, it may look unappetizing and having funny name, but you taste it and it's delicious. I find it to taste very, very good. So you
Depending
see
on
it.
which one you eat, because like I said, I had some that were just like, oh, this really needs ketchup to choke this down.
True, true. And didn't, I think our grandmother, Bain, there was some kind of, again, in the tradition of stretching things, meat with carbohydrates, the ground beef and macaroni, she called it slumgullion?
Slumgullion.
Slumgullion, so,
Which is a thing. I think it is Polish. If you just do a Google search of slumgullion, it's an actual dish. But it really isn't much like Johnny Marzetti or macaroni bake. Yeah, I think she was kind of losing it at the time.
well, well, you try to, that's a sort of thing like I didn't interview our father extensively about family history until near the end of his days, and then at some point he cut off and he wouldn't tell me any more stories. So that's gotta catch them while they're there.
Right,
So,
right.
and then, but then these family, it's oral history tradition once again, not backed up by documented paper sources. So when it goes down as family tradition, it's
Yeah.
doesn't meet the what might be called the gold standard of history.
Well, our cousin has grandma's recipe for Goetta, and she says it's really not very good. It has a lot of clove in it, and she doesn't care for it, but she does use the recipe her German uncle had. So there you go. Yeah, Germans are just good cooks, and they can just make anything good.
Well, my mother-in-law likes the spicy kind, she won't eat the regular kind, she likes the spicy
Yeah,
kind.
Gleer's makes a spicy kind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Ken, it's customary at the end of these things, you usually come up front
I
and
do.
kind of
I do.
give a benediction to us, right?
Yeah. Well, I have to say thank you very much, Marianna, and thank you both for coming. Andrew's always here. Andrew, I have to tell, don't mind me telling this little story here. I know Andrew works long hours, I mean, like sometimes 12, 14-hour days. Sometimes we have speakers, and we've really had good speakers here. Sometimes we have some, and they're all interesting, but poor old Andrew, and he's one of the sharpest guys I know, especially when it comes to history, especially Civil War. But you'll look back there and the speaker's talking and Andrew will be kind of nodding off. And I tell the speaker, say, look, that man works 12 to 14 hours a day and comes right from work here. So it isn't any reflection on your talk. He's just tired from a long work day. I said, but when you want to know about Civil War history, I've learned more from him, I think, probably, than just about anybody. But at any rate, I do have a couple of presentations for our speakers here. Now, you can take your choice of who wants which. I got two books for you.
Well, what are their titles?
One of them is Sacred Ties from the West Point Brothers to Battlefield Rivals, A True Story of the Civil War by Tom Carhart.
Well, I noticed the other one is Grant Comes East.
Yeah, now
That is alternate
That's
history.
fiction. Well, it's fiction.
I love alternate history.
Okay, so,
So,
Marianne's more of a guest.
or do you like alternate?
But I mean,
I have a stack already waiting to be read, so I can't.
so.
So I get both the
You
books.
can have the candy, yeah, go ahead.
The Gettables! I'm getting the Gettables!
Like, I have to say, like with, well, I don't know, I've never read any of that alternate history stuff, but
Also because you stayed awake through my entire paper.
with
He was standing up, that's why.
Standing up.
with historical fiction.
You stayed awake through your presentation.